The restaurant was quiet in the way only expensive places are. Crystal glasses shimmered under golden chandeliers. Soft piano music floated through the air. Waiters moved like rehearsed dancers between white linen tables. Conversations were hushed, controlled, polished. Then the door opened. A man stepped inside wearing a long black coat, slightly worn boots, and round-tinted glasses. His hair fell loose around his shoulders. He didn't look rich. He didn't look important. He looked ordinary. A few guests glanced up, then quickly looked back down. The hostess gave him a tight smile. Reservation? His voice was calm, soft. No, just a table for one. Her eyes scanned him from head to toe. The boots, the coat, the rings on his fingers. "I'm sorry," she said, lowering her voice just enough to sound polite. "We're fully booked." Behind her, 3 empty tables sat perfectly set. The man noticed. "Oh," he replied gently. "I don't mind waiting." A waiter leaned toward the hostess and whispered something. She stiffened slightly, then looked back at him. "Sir, this establishment maintains a certain dress standard." A nearby table went silent. The man tilted his head. "Is that so?" The waiter stepped forward now, emboldened by the quiet stares of wealthy guests watching. "We don't serve people dressed like that." A fork froze mid-air at one table. Someone chuckled softly at another. The man didn't react. No anger. No embarrassment. Just stillness. He slowly removed his glasses. It was Ozzy Osbourne, but no one there recognized him. The manager approached, adjusting his suit jacket. "Sir," he said in a rehearsed tone of superiority, "perhaps you'd be more comfortable somewhere less formal." A few guests smirked. Ozzy glanced around the room, at the chandeliers, at the guests, at the empty tables. Then he looked back at the manager. "Are you refusing service?" he asked quietly. The manager didn't hesitate. "Yes." Silence. Ozzy studied his face for a long moment, not angry, not hurt, just observing. Then he checked his watch. "All right," he said calmly. "I'll wait." The waiter scoffed. "Wait for what?" Ozzy slipped his glasses back on. "You'll see." He stepped aside near the entrance and leaned against the wall, completely relaxed. The whispers began. Who does he think he is? Probably can't even afford the menu. Why hasn't security removed him? Outside, through the tall glass windows, headlights slowly pulled into the valet lane. Inside, the manager straightened his tie confidently. 10 minutes. That's all it would take, because in exactly 10 minutes, the people who refused to serve him would be the ones begging. Ozzy remained near the entrance, calm and unbothered, as if he had all the time in the world. Inside, the restaurant returned to its polished rhythm. Forks clinking softly, wine being poured, low laughter echoing across the room. But every few seconds, someone glanced toward him. The poorly dressed man who refused to leave. Behind the front desk, the hostess whispered sharply. "Why is he still standing there?" The waiter shrugged, probably trying to make a scene. The manager adjusted his cuffs. "If he doesn't leave in 5 minutes, call security." A couple seated near the entrance openly stared now. One woman leaned toward her husband. "He doesn't belong here." Her husband nodded. These types always try their luck. Ozzy heard every word, but he didn't move. He wasn't angry. He wasn't humiliated. He was observing. A young busboy passed by him carrying a tray of glasses. For a brief second, their eyes met. Unlike the others, the boy didn't look annoyed. He looked curious. Ozzy gave him a small nod. The boy hesitated, then nodded back before hurrying away. Near the bar, 2 businessmen began whispering. "Look at him." Probably thought this was a pub. But he walked in off the street. Soft laughter followed. The waiter returned to the manager. "He's still here." The manager exhaled in frustration. Unbelievable. He walked over again, this time less polite. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." Ozzy slowly turned his head. "I'm not disturbing anyone. You're making our guests uncomfortable." Ozzy glanced at the guests. Many quickly looked away. "Am I?" he asked calmly. The manager's jaw tightened. This is a private establishment. There it was. Not about reservations. Not about dress code. About status. Ozzy folded his hands in front of him. How long have you worked here? He asked casually. The manager blinked, confused. Excuse me? How long? 3 years. Ozzy nodded slowly, as if filing that information away. Good to know. The manager scoffed. Security will escort you out. Ozzy checked his watch again. 3 minutes had passed. Outside. A sleek black car rolled fully into the valet lane. The valet staff suddenly stood straighter. Inside, the dishwasher rushed into the kitchen whispering. Someone important just arrived. The head chef stepped out briefly to look through the window. The manager didn't notice. He was too focused on the man in the black coat. Ozzy gave him one last calm look. I'd wait, Ozzy said softly. For what? The manager snapped. Ozzy's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. For you to realize your mistake. Across the room, the front door opened again. Heavy footsteps entered, and suddenly, the energy in the restaurant shifted. The footsteps grew louder. Every guest in the restaurant subconsciously straightened. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The soft clinking of glasses and the faint piano notes were swallowed by the tension in the air. Ozzy remained leaning casually against the wall, calm as ever. He didn't flinch. He didn't frown. He simply observed patient quiet, like a predator studying its surroundings. The manager, however, was losing composure. His confident facade was cracking. He tugged at his collar and glanced nervously toward the entrance. Security, he muttered under his breath. 2 uniformed men stepped forward, looking unsure. They had been trained for situations like this. Yet something about the stillness of the man in black made them hesitate. They exchanged a quick glance, then stopped. Ozzy slowly adjusted his glasses. He watched the manager twitch and the guests shuffle in their seats. The power in the room had subtly shifted. It wasn't in the suits or the chandeliers, or the polished floors. It was in the man who hadn't uttered a single raised voice. A whisper floated through the room, almost involuntarily. Who is he? Ozzy's eyes scanned the tables. Some guests stared openly now, curiosity replacing their earlier amusement. He noticed the waiter leaning against the bar, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. Even the hostess was frozen mid-step, unsure of what to do next. Then the manager's phone rang. He stepped away, fumbling to answer. Yes, he said, his voice a little too high, a little too hurried. On the other end, a calm, authoritative voice spoke. One that made the manager freeze instantly. Do you realize who is standing in your restaurant? The manager's grip on the phone tightened, knuckles white. He swallowed hard, his eyes widening as he took a step back. Sir, yes, I understand. He stammered. He hung up, turning back toward the dining area, his confidence completely gone. His posture slumped. He wasn't in control anymore. Not even close. Ozzy adjusted his coat and straightened his stance. His gaze swept the room once more, patient, composed, powerful. No one knew what was coming next. But everyone could feel it. Because in exactly 10 minutes, the same people who had refused him service, laughed at his appearance, and questioned his place, would be the ones begging. The calm before the storm had arrived. And Ozzy was the storm. The manager's hands shook slightly as he returned to the front desk. His confident facade was gone, replaced by something closer to panic. He stared at Ozzy, who remained perfectly still, calm as a shadow. His phone vibrated against the polished counter. He fumbled to pick it up. Hello, he said, his voice tighter than he intended. On the other end, a voice spoke, calm, authoritative, unmistakable. Do you realize who is standing in your restaurant right now? The manager froze. His heart skipped. Something in that voice made the polished floors feel unstable beneath his feet. Yes, sir, I understand. He stammered. A pause. You need to fix this immediately. Do whatever it takes. The manager's face went pale. He gripped the phone as if it were a lifeline. His eyes darted toward the entrance where Ozzy leaned casually, unnoticed, still waiting. He hung up, turned back toward the dining room, and his voice was unsteady. Sir, I apologize. There's been a misunderstanding. The staff, who had been whispering among themselves, froze. Even the waiter who had openly mocked Ozzy earlier couldn't meet his gaze. Ozzy tilted his head slightly. He didn't say a word. The silence in the room had grown heavy, almost tangible. Every guest felt it, something monumental was happening. The manager swallowed hard, clearly trying to regain composure. He approached Ozzy cautiously. Sir, please, your table is ready. Anything you wish, we'll take care of it immediately. Ozzy glanced around the room once. The guests now watched silently, sensing that something had shifted. The whispers had died. The subtle laughter had vanished. He smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. "This will do," he said calmly, gesturing toward the prepared table. The waiter's jaw dropped. The hostess stepped back. Even the dishwasher peeked through the kitchen doorway, eyes wide in disbelief. The power in the room had shifted completely. What had started as mockery and condescension was now embarrassment, respect, and awe. Ozzy slowly walked to the table, each step deliberate, unhurried. He sat down as if claiming a throne, because in this moment, he was the undisputed authority. The manager stood frozen, realizing the magnitude of his mistake. 10 minutes. That's all it had taken. 10 minutes of waiting, of quiet observation, of letting their arrogance speak for itself. And now, the people who had refused him service were the ones begging. Ozzy slowly rose from his position near the entrance, each movement deliberate, every step measured, as if the polished floor beneath him knew the authority of the man walking across it. The whispers that had filled the room moments ago fell silent. Even the soft hum of the piano seemed to pause, waiting for what was about to happen. The manager, once confident and self-assured, now looked like a man clinging to the edges of a crumbling wall. He adjusted his tie for what felt like the 10th time in as many seconds, his jaw tight, his eyes darting nervously toward the guests. Every guest had stopped whatever they were doing, their forks frozen mid-air, their glasses half raised. They could feel the shift, subtle but undeniable, the power of someone who did not need to prove himself, because he already had. Ozzy approached the table the manager had hastily prepared, his coat flowing slightly with each step. The polished wooden chairs squeaked under his touch as he slid into the seat. Calm, collected, composed. He did not raise his voice. He did not glare. He simply existed in a way that demanded attention. The manager swallowed, his face pale. "Sir, we apologize. There's been a misunderstanding," he stammered, voice quivering. Ozzy looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every person who had smirked, whispered, or laughed at him. His gaze was firm but not cruel. It was a look that carried the weight of experience, of authority, of quiet confidence. The guests shifted uncomfortably, realizing the error of their assumptions. Then Ozzy spoke, voice low, calm, deliberate. "You don't refuse someone's service based on how they look." The room went silent. A few guests exchanged nervous glances. The waiter, who had leaned over and whispered his judgment earlier, now looked down at the floor, cheeks burning. The hostess clasped her hands together, unable to meet Ozzy's steady gaze. Even the dishwasher peeking from the kitchen doorway had stopped mid-step, awe and respect written across his young face. The manager's voice wavered. "Sir, please, anything you wish. The restaurant is at your disposal." Ozzy tilted his head slightly, a faint smirk on his lips. "I didn't come here to prove anything, but perhaps this is a lesson some need to learn." He waved a hand, signaling to the waiter to bring a glass of water. Every motion deliberate, unhurried, commanding the room without a single raised tone. Then came the viral moment. Ozzy leaned back in his chair and addressed the staff, his voice calm but sharp. "Tonight, everyone eats free." "On me," the room collectively gasped. Waiters froze mid-step, some gripping trays as if afraid they might drop them. Guests whispered in disbelief. The manager's jaw dropped. Relief and embarrassment battled across his face, but there was no escaping the humiliation. He had underestimated the quiet man in the black coat. But then came the final twist. Ozzy's eyes locked on the manager. Calmly, deliberately, he said, "Accept you." The manager's face turned crimson. The waiter who had mocked him earlier took a nervous step back. Every guest leaned in, sensing the full weight of Ozzy's authority, his quiet dominance over the situation. The man who had been laughed at, ignored, and judged had turned the entire room upside down with nothing more than his presence, his patience, and his reputation. Ozzy's smirk remained subtle. It wasn't arrogance. It was quiet satisfaction. A demonstration of power not through anger or shouting, but through observation, timing, and letting the arrogant reveal themselves. Guests murmured among themselves, trying to process what had just happened. Some reached for their phones to capture it, but even the cameras couldn't capture the full impact. The lesson was clear: respect is earned. Assumptions are dangerous, and appearances can be deceiving. As Ozzy took a sip of water, the room began to breathe again. The staff adjusted, nervously but obediently. Guests continued their meals, now aware that the man sitting calmly at the table was more than anyone had imagined. The story of the refused service had become a story of reversal, of justice, of quiet power. 10 minutes. That's all it took, From mockery to awe, from judgment to respect. The people who had refused him service were now the ones begging. The room had changed. The laughter, the whispers, the judgment, all replaced by a tension that hummed softly, like a wire pulled taut. Every guest, waiter, and staff member now understood that they had miscalculated. They had underestimated the quiet man in the black coat. Ozzy remained seated, calm as ever. His hands rested on the table, fingers lightly drumming against the polished wood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand apologies. He simply observed, letting each person feel the weight of their mistake before he spoke. That, more than anything, was his power. The manager, still pale, took a hesitant step forward. "Sir, please, I'm so sorry. We didn't know we should have I." Ozzy raised a hand, stopping him mid-apology. "Do not speak," he said, voice calm but firm. "You already know what you did wrong." The words hit harder than any shout could have. Silence fell again. The guests looked at the manager, whose posture slumped in defeat. He had been publicly humiliated without a single raised voice. He had lost control. And Ozzy hadn't even touched him. Then Ozzy did something unexpected. He leaned back slightly and gestured to the staff with a subtle nod. "Tonight," he said softly but audibly enough for all to hear, "everyone here will eat free, on me. Consider it a lesson in respect." Gasps echoed around the room. Waiters froze, holding trays mid-step. The front desk staff exchanged wide-eyed glances. Guests whispered nervously. Even the dishwasher peeking from the kitchen doorway froze, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. But then Ozzy's gaze returned to the manager. His eyes locked with the man's, steady and unflinching. A faint smile curved his lips. "Except you," he added, quiet but cutting, a statement that cut deeper than any insult. The manager's face turned crimson. His voice caught in his throat. He tried to speak, but no words came. Every guest felt the tension, felt the reversal of power. The man who had seemed meek, out of place and vulnerable, the man they had judged, was now the one commanding the room without raising his voice. Ozzy's presence filled the space, commanding attention through calmness and authority. He didn't need to shout or display anger. He simply existed in a way that made everyone else feel the truth of their arrogance. The lesson was clear: disrespect, assumptions, and judgments have consequences, and sometimes the quietest person is the one with the most power. Guests began to murmur softly among themselves. Some reached for their phones to capture the moment. Some simply stared in awe, realizing they had witnessed something extraordinary. The room had transformed from a place of judgment to a stage of humility, and everyone present felt it. Even the staff, initially complicit in the manager's arrogance, now moved carefully, almost reverently. They approached Ozzy with caution, offering apologies and assistance, but there was a new understanding in the air. Respect had been earned, not demanded. Ozzy, for his part, remained composed. He took a slow sip of water, eyes scanning the room, noting the subtle gestures of recognition and acknowledgement from those around him. There was no need for further words. The lesson had been delivered. The power dynamic had shifted. The moment had been immortalized in silence and presence, and then, finally, the manager, humbled and shaken, approached. His voice was low, careful, almost a whisper. "Sir, I can't apologize enough. I misjudged you." Ozzy met his gaze, calm, eyes steady, but with a warmth that softened the moment. "You did what you thought was right," he said. "Now you know what is right." A hush fell over the restaurant. The guests, staff, and even the few onlookers outside could feel the weight of the moment. It wasn't just about money, fame, or appearances. It was about respect, humility, and understanding the value of every person, regardless of how they seemed at first glance. Ozzy stood slowly, smoothing his coat, every movement deliberate. The room seemed to lean in slightly, as if in anticipation. He glanced at the waiter who had whispered his judgment earlier. Their eyes met. No words were exchanged, but the young man understood. He had been taught a lesson he would never forget. Then, with a subtle nod to the staff and a faint smile to the guests, Ozzy turned and walked toward the exit. The room exhaled collectively. What had begun as a moment of mockery, disrespect, and arrogance had transformed into a lesson in power, patience, and the quiet authority of someone who commanded respect not by shouting, but simply by being. 10 minutes. That was all it took. 10 minutes of waiting, watching, and letting arrogance reveal itself. 10 minutes for a man who had been underestimated to turn the entire room upside down and leave behind a lesson that no one would forget. As he disappeared through the doors, the whispers returned, but now they were different. Respect replaced ridicule. Awe replaced laughter. The story of the refused service had become the story of the quiet power that humbles all who dare judge. And the manager, left standing in the center of the room, knew one thing for certain: he would never, ever underestimate anyone again. The restaurant had returned to its rhythm, but the atmosphere had changed forever. Conversations resumed, but they were quieter, softer, respectful. Guests no longer glanced judgmentally at one another. Instead, they glanced at the empty space where Ozzy had been standing moments ago, trying to process what had just occurred. The manager remained frozen at the center of the floor, still pale, still trembling, still humiliated. His arrogance, so evident a few minutes earlier, had been stripped away completely, replaced by understanding. He had been taught a lesson in patience, humility, and the quiet authority of someone who needed no validation from others. Across the room, the staff whispered among themselves. The waiter who had openly mocked Ozzy earlier shifted nervously, eyes downcast, cheeks flushed with shame. The hostess, the bartenders, even the busboy and dishwasher, each one carried a sense of awe, a newfound respect. They had witnessed a masterclass in power delivered not with shouting, not with dominance, but with patience, observation, and timing. The guests murmured among themselves, some pulling out their phones, eager to capture the story of the evening. They had witnessed a live example of what they had read in stories and biographies. Respect is not demanded, it is earned, and the man they had misjudged had earned it in the quietest, most effective way possible. Ozzy's departure left a vacuum, one that everyone felt. The air seemed heavier, charged with the echo of lessons learned. The restaurant, once a place of casual judgment, had become a stage for understanding, and in that moment, it became clear the story wasn't about a man in a black coat refusing to leave. It was about human arrogance and the consequences of misjudgment. Later, in whispers and quiet conversations, the guests shared what had happened. Social media posts would emerge, telling the story in fragments. Videos would circulate, clips of stunned waiters, pale-faced managers, and the calm authority of a man who had been underestimated. The story would go viral, but its lesson would remain intact. Appearances can deceive, assumptions can mislead, and patience can wield more power than anger. Back in the kitchen, the young dishwasher, who had peeked through the doorway in awe, finally spoke. "I've never seen anyone do that," he said to a colleague. He didn't yell. He didn't fight. He just waited. And everyone else revealed themselves. "Exactly," the colleague replied softly. "That's the power of knowing who you are." The manager, alone in his office later that night, replayed the scene over and over. The memory of Ozzy's calm, deliberate movements haunted him. Every time he tried to justify his earlier actions, he felt the weight of embarrassment and humility. But more than that, he understood the lesson: respect cannot be forced, only acknowledged. Outside, the valet staff and a few lingering guests watched as Ozzy's car drove away, black and sleek, lights reflecting off the polished pavement. He had left no words, no threats, no declarations. Only the lasting impression of presence, authority, and quiet mastery, and in that final moment, the message was unmistakable. 10 minutes, that was all it had taken. 10 minutes of calm observation, of patience, of letting arrogance speak for itself. 10 minutes that would echo far beyond the walls of the restaurant, into social media feeds, whispered conversations, and personal reflections. The moral was simple, yet profound: never underestimate anyone based on appearance, status, or first impressions. True authority is revealed in patience, not in confrontation. Power is not in proving yourself, it is in letting others reveal their own shortcomings. The guests would remember the night for years. The staff would tell the story again and again. The video clips online would rack up thousands, then millions of views. But Ozzy, he didn't need recognition. He had done what he came to do. The lesson had been delivered. Respect had been restored. And the story, this viral, unforgettable moment, had been written. 10 minutes. That was all it took. The world had witnessed it, and it would never forget. The restaurant slowly returned to its rhythm, but the air had shifted. What had been casual chatter and polite laughter was now replaced by quiet reflection. Guests who had smirked at the poorly dressed man now whispered in awe, replaying the evening in their minds. The manager, once confident and commanding, sat alone at the front desk. His tie was crooked, his hand still trembling slightly. He had learned a lesson no training manual could teach: assumptions are dangerous, arrogance is costly, and patience can wield more power than anger ever could. The staff moved carefully now. Waiters and hostesses exchanged glances, the ones who had doubted Ozzy earlier now full of respect and humility. Even the dishwasher, the youngest in the room, looked on with awe, quietly realizing the difference between power and authority, between ego and true presence. Outside, the valet staff watched Ozzy's sleek black car glide away into the night. No words were exchanged. No need for recognition. The man in the black coat had delivered a lesson without raising his voice, without demanding respect. He simply existed in a way that commanded it, and the guests would tell the story again and again. On social media, snippets of the moment would go viral. Clips of shocked waiters, pale-faced managers, and Ozzy's calm, authoritative gaze would spread. But beyond the entertainment, the lesson would linger. Respect is earned, not assumed. Appearances can deceive, and patience often speaks louder than confrontation. The moral was simple but unforgettable: never underestimate anyone. Power is not measured by arrogance or money or appearances. It's measured by patience, self-control, and the quiet ability to let the truth reveal itself. As Ozzy disappeared into the night, the whispers began. "Did you see that? I can't believe he just did that. That was incredible." And then came the clicks, the posts, the videos shared with friends, all carrying the same message. 10 minutes had changed everything. 10 minutes had transformed judgment into respect, arrogance into humility, and a simple act of mockery into a viral story that would inspire and teach. And for the audience watching, reading, or sharing this story, there was only one question left. What would you do if someone underestimated you? And how would you show them your true power?